I'm joined in the studio by John Lanchester, who is the novel of Capital. John, thank you so much for coming to Jazz FM.
Thank you, Rosemary.
So let's start off with the Capital. Just tell us about the story, please.
It's all set around the lives of a group of characters who live in a single street in southwest London, and it's set over a year from the end of 2007 to the end of 2008. It's just as the credit crunch is starting, which is something that the reader knows but the characters don't. So there's a dramatic irony in the sense that the audience knows something that the people on stage don't know, that things are about to take this sharp turn for the worse. And there's this large and disparate cast of characters.
Now, do you know, I read somewhere that the main characters are in fact the houses.
That was where the book started for me, actually, with this image of I was just wandering about one day and there were no people in the street, but there were about 5 different kinds of van near where I live. There was like dog walkers, florist, Pilates instructor, wine delivery, a Cardo van at the posh end of the street, Tesco van at the other end of the street. And all this stuff being brought to houses, and this thought struck me, well, it's as if the houses have come alive. It's the houses have these sort of demands and are quite sort of difficult, needy, bossy people. And that was the image that the book started with, actually, that property prices have become so important and property has become so central to people's lives that it's as if that, like the houses are the principal characters and the people are just a kind of ancillary cast.
And tell us about these people. I'm actually interested to know who your favourite resident is and why.
I don't let myself have favourites because it makes it harder to write. And the image I had in my head when I was writing the book was that the characters are like snooker balls, that you don't play with all the balls at the same time when you're playing, but when you do, they weigh the same. That was the image, so that the characters wanted them to feel equally important, equally sort of central to the story. I've had a few people say that they think that there's a banker and his wife and feel that they're, as it were, central to the story. I don't think that's right, but I think what happens to them is because they go through this boom and bust cycle, and I think that they're quite close to the general story of the culture. But there's also a Zimbabwean asylum seeker who's a traffic warden, there's a Polish builder, there's a Hungarian nanny, there's a Senegalese football player, and there's a little old lady who's the oldest person living in the street, to have been born in the street. So there is a broadcast of I wouldn't say typical Londoners, because I'm not sure that such a thing exists, but the sort of the kind of spread of people you get in London.
And the banker that you just mentioned there, Roger, that's his name. He actually, for me, is interesting because he says he wants an easy life. But how can you have an easy life when you work 7 in the morning till 7 at night in the city?
But that's a paradoxical thing about money that I've often observed, that people tell themselves they're earning the money in order to be free, and they don't actually see what their day is like. There's this, I think it's a Seamus Heaney poem about Robert Lowell that has this great line that really stays with me, that the way we are living will have been our life. So in other words, your typical day is what your life turns out to have been when you look back at it. But I think people often forget that.
Yes.
And I've noticed that, one of the things, but there's lots of people who work in finance around where we live, and you don't actually see the men in the day at all, ever. They're gone before dawn and they're back, heaven knows when, they're back after dark. And it's strange to see people working, so much of their being submersed in just the world of money. And you wonder, actually, if they're thinking about what it's for.
Yes. So these characters on the same street, they actually, I suppose, are connected together by an anonymous postcard. Well, they all get a postcard, and it reads, "We want what you have." Dun, dun, dun. So who is this person and what do they want?
Well, that's what everyone in the book ends up wondering, with various degrees of anxiety. I was very interested by the thing I've noticed in London is how little people's lives brush up against each other. That people can live next door to each other and really have no contact, next to no contact for years. And that you get this funny thing of kind of parallel private lives. And I wanted to have a structure that both had that and also forced them to be pulled together. And I was starting to think about that and what these people have in common. And in fact, in a funny way, what they have in common is the fact that they live in that street and people would like to live in that street. There's a kind of feeling of people want what they have, and that's the germ of the postcards came from that. And there is a mystery behind them which I mustn't give away, but they all react to it. In a sense, everyone in the book reacts the same way, that they think that is a question about money, they all frame it in terms of money. And I think that one of the things the book suggests is that there are these other sources of value in people's lives that they sometimes fail to see.
I was going to say, does the book suggest lessons to be learnt, in fact?
It's funny that, because it's much clearer to me now. If you'd asked me that while I was writing, said, what's it about? I don't know. It's just this story. But it's much clearer afterwards that's one of the things that's very much at the centre of it. It's about what people's values are, maybe as a society what our values collectively are, and ways in which they might have changed a little bit, and ways in which people might be mistaking, capital in the financial sense for the other kinds of value that they have, in their relationships and families and the other sources of meaning that there are.
Yes. And being the son of a banker, John, was it inevitable that you should write another book about the financial crash?
Well, no. I mean, my dad he worked for a bank, but it was not, it wasn't banking in the modern sense, and that actually it's been very helpful to me in terms of trying to understand what's gone on. Partly because it's very different. Lending people money to start a business is different from credit default swaps and collateralized debt obligations and all the things that underlay the great crash. So no, I mean, I think if my dad's looking down on me now from he's I don't know whether he's rolling in his grave or roaring with laughter at the thought of me writing about money, because it's a subject in which I exhibited absolutely no interest at all for the first sort of 4 decades of my life. But I suppose that if you write novels, you get interested in why things happen.
Yes.
And how the world works, and you get sort of more interested in that, I think. What's the thing behind the thing? What's the real story? What's the non-immediately obvious story? And that, I think, does, in the modern world, that does often lead you towards explanations that are about economics and money. That's often the thing behind the veil.
And did I read that you actually predicted the financial crash before it even came upon us? Well, I wonder if you're in the wrong job, John.
Yes. I'd be on my own. I'd be like a Bond villain on a night, stroking a cat on some tropical island somewhere. No, I thought that a crash was coming. I did think that, and I thought that the derivative. Once you find out what these derivative things are and the way they're sort of spread all around the world. I did think it would probably be linked to that, but I was also completely wrong, because I thought that it would, just from wandering about and looking around the place, I thought, well, this London property thing is a bit mad. That thing we were talking about as if the houses are so expensive, it's if they've come alive. I thought, this can't go on, and of course I was right about there being a crash, but completely wrong about it being based in London property, because, I mean, the irony is. Of all the asset categories in the world, one of the only ones that's completely unaffected by everything that happened was, in fact, London property. So it's probably just as well I'm not a city boy, because I'd have lost it all several times over by now.
Thank you so much, John, for coming into Jazz FM.
Thank you very much.